welcome to those welcome you who've joined us today. We've got probably half of the attendees entered already, and we're awaiting the other half. The stragglers will make their way in. My name is Daryl Chen. I'm a trustee of the London Society, and this is the first of a 3-lecture series for this year's planning school. Planning school has been running for a few years now, and it's an opportunity, an annual event, and an opportunity here at the London Society to encourage more people to engage more widely with the planning system in the capital. And by planning, we mean, you know, the formal planning system, but also kind of general urban development. So this is a real vehicle for more people to become engaged with planning, it being so influential about you know, our daily lives and what the city looks and feels like. Last year, we, for those who attended, you may recall, we looked at the last 50 years of London's planning, and we took a decade each week, and that was a fascinating run through with some really amazing speakers who gave us kind of the back history of how we got to the present. And that was in the beautiful kind of mid-restoration stage of the Peckham Rye station waiting room down in South London. We were very fortunate to have that. Perhaps fortunately, you've not had to trudge all the way to South London today, and we're joined online. And so thank you again for joining us here today. Many of you will have been on your screens all day, but hopefully this is a bit of a kind of a release of the stress of work. So put your feet up, get yourself a glass of orange juice and make yourself comfortable. We've got 3 great speakers over the coming weeks. Next week, Catherine Firth will be speaking on her home, not her hometown, but her town of Boston, and the North American experience. And the following week will be David Rudland, who's recently been appointed to government to write a national design code. And he'll be speaking about the continental experience with France in the spotlight. So as you can tell, this year we've been looking at the conceit of the planning school is to hold a mirror up to our planning system in London and in the UK by looking at international examples. And so we're looking at 3 other continents: North America, Europe, and today Japan, to see to have a critical reflection on our planning system, particularly relevant given that the government has put out a white paper to change the planning system in what they describe as a radical way. And as a kind of quirk of coincidence, today is the last opportunity for you to get your comments on that. The consultation closes, I believe, just before midnight tonight. So as soon as you log off from this at 7:30, get onto the Google white paper planning, and there will be a series of questions that allow you to address the changes, the radical changes in the planning system that the government is planning on making. And you can say yay or nay to those. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Takeshi Hayatsu. He is a Japanese architect practicing in London and a founding director of Hayatsu Architects. He studied in Tokyo and at the Architectural Association in London, before then having worked stints at David Chipperfield Architects, Howard Tompkins, and 6A Architects, before forming his own practice in 2017, which has been featured in this latest edition of the Architectural Foundation's New Architects 4, surveying the best British architectural practices established in the past 10 years. And I'm quite excited about his work at Bermondsey for the Blue Market, which we are eagerly waiting for here in South London. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Takeshi. There will be about 30 minutes of the presentation. We'll have some questions afterwards. And please, as we go through, feel free to pop your questions in the Q&A, and we'll pick up the discussion after the talk. So over to you, Takeshi.
Well, Thank you, Daryl. Great introduction. And hello, everybody. My name is Takeshi Hayatsu. As Daryl mentioned, I have a practice called Hayatsu Architects based in Bermondsey, actually. I'm going to talk about Japanese planning, although I'm slightly nervous because I know very little about it. Because I never worked in Japan since I left there after I finished my study degree in Tokyo in 1993. Since then, I go back to Japan every year, so I am kind of up to speed with what's happening there, but not quite an expert to lecture the Japanese planning as such. Let me share the screen to start my presentation. Oops, sorry. Yeah. Is the slide changing, Daryl? Is it okay?
Yep, looks good.
The Tokyo picture, yes? Great. Okay, so surprisingly, Japanese planning permission system is based on the British Town and Country Planning Act, 1962. Yet the outcome is so different. I hope I can give an introductory insight into a rather unique interpretation of the system and how it came about through the brief history of Tokyo as a case study. Tokyo, as you know, is a vast expanse of a metropolitan area for the population of over 13 million people. And this is a view from the Sunshine City Tower in Ikebukuro. Quite striking to see that how many houses are in the shadow of the building. The strange thing in Tokyo is that most of the buildings are actually low density, two-story houses. This is because the city carries the DNA of Edo period. The picture was taken in 1865. Edo period lasted between 1603 to 1868, during which the country cut itself from outside contact, remaining isolated from the world more than 200 years. Edo was the tapestry of walled gardens and horizontal lines of roof eaves. So this is the fundamental difference to Western cities where architecture is defined vertically by facade. Japanese cities are horizontal, organized in plan form with no facade. So the country was ruled by shogun and daimyo, provincial lords, a centralized feudal system. The government was located in Edo, which is now Tokyo. This is the map of Edo. The yellow areas are all for daimyo's dwelling. The brown is for merchants, orange is for castles, and purple for temples and shrines, and green for agriculture. Edo was a beautiful, vibrant city and was a fertile ground to nurture many Japanese culture, such as art, popular culture, and food. Its legacy still resonates today. Daimyo yashiki, the lord's dwellings, can be seen in this old map of Edo as large patches of white with their circular family crest on them. Inside the compound was large landscaped gardens, which were surrounded by continuous walls. This kind of gardens were not public. Just to explain how Japan was ruled at the time, provincial lords had to travel once a year to go back to their own province while keeping their family in Edo. This is the way of hostage so that they cannot be against the central government. Old map of Japan to show the geographical locations between Edo and all the cities such as Osaka and Kyoto on the left-hand side, where they kept the imperial family away from the central government. The routes between the cities developed as stations for traveling. 1854, arrival of black ships. Commander Perry from America arrived at Yokohama and forced the government to open the country to Western world, which led to the collapse of Edo, end of the shogunate, and restoration of imperial power to the Meiji Emperor, so-called Meiji Restoration. The regional aristocrats no longer had to be present in Tokyo. Many of them returned to the provinces, taking their families and personal, and leaving vast abandoned spaces in the center of the capital. Tokyo's population fell significantly. The Meiji government made all land a tradable and taxable goods. Landowners became more and more powerful. Private land ownership developed into a major factor in shaping Japanese urban planning. Meiji era between 1868 and 1912, when the country rapidly imported Western culture and industry and started building Western style architecture. Also the urban plan. This was a master plan by Wilhelm Bucknam, German engineer, who proposed Parisian axis and symmetry. This project was dropped. English architect Josiah Condor was invited to teach architecture in the University of Tokyo. Until then, there was no architects, nor the concept of architecture existed in Japan. He designed a Icho London in central Tokyo. Icho is the Japanese measurement, is roughly about 109 meters. One of his students from Tokyo University was Kingo Tatsuno, who became the first national architect in Japan. He designed Tokyo Central Station, which is restored and preserved today. History of Japanese urban planning is intrinsic to natural disasters. Great Kanto earthquake hit Tokyo in 1923. Most of the buildings in the city collapsed. Brick buildings were also proved not strong enough. And many buildings burned down by the subsequent fire. Everything burned down to ashes. So this is the list of major earthquakes and how the regulations and laws were changed subsequently. Japanese planning system is closely tied with building regulations. Buildings have to be built resistant to earthquake and not combustible. And spaces between have to be wide enough for emergency vehicles to be able to go through. The city's zones are divided into 12 categories. This is the current map of Tokyo, color-coded. So 12 categories from residential area to industrial area. And each zone is given the massing volumes. So you can see the number, that is the percentage per the plot of land, how much volumes you are allowed to be built. The massing is really prescribed. So this is a sort of a diagram showing how much you can build according to the zones, with many other restrictions which can be determined mathematically. This is the so-called shasen that you restricted by the kind of angle from the edge of the road. Each restrictions concern the safety as well as sunlight provisions, which sets the volumes of buildings almost automatically. So within the set volume, you are allowed to do anything. So it's a complete freedom. there are no regulations for material nor aesthetic unless it is in the designated historic area, which is very, very rare in Japanese cities. This is an extreme case, a self-built house in Mita district by Keisuke Oka. So he's been building this house for his own for the last 10 years or so. So the massing restrictions along the main streets are maximized, which led to the proliferation of pencil building types. The wall of tall buildings acts as a fire barrier to prevent fire spreading block to block, protecting low-rise houses behind. These houses are densely built, mixed with different generations of buildings, with no front gardens. Instead, people put pots of plants on the street, which is very sweet. Most of the houses are built in timber. The private lands are subdivided over generations, creating different typologies. The building plots are becoming smaller and smaller. The Google Maps can tell how the generations evolved. For example, that is an older generation, which has got a larger plot, which will be probably subdivided into smaller houses and getting smaller and smaller. This is a map of risk areas for earthquakes. Level 5 in dark red is the most dangerous district because of the small narrow roads. So the planning regulations encourage changes by imposing the future restrictions in order to widen the road gradually, and relocates households to high-rise buildings made from concrete and create a physical fire barrier to the wooden houses behind. Another threat is flood. This is the hazard map of Tokyo, where the flood risk is high. They built an infrastructure to cope with the sudden flash of water by building a massive underground reservoir and linked with other deep holes to slow the water before gushing towards the city center. Another major change was the World War II. Tokyo was heavily bombed. By the time the war was over in 1945, 1/3 of Tokyo was destroyed. But it was also modernist dream situation. On the other hand, Kenzo Tange, the Japanese architect, drew this futuristic vision for Tokyo in 1960. And Tokyo Olympic accelerated the redevelopment of Tokyo. Another Tange's masterpiece, Yoyogi Olympic Gymnasium. The highways were built over rivers in order to avoid complex land negotiations with private landowners. The historic bridges such as Nihonbashi Bridge was covered under the flyovers as a result. Now it is considered harmful to the heritage, so the highways will be relocated to the new underground tunnels and restore the valuable waterside amenities. I'd like to quickly touch on suburb. Similarly to London, expansion of railways created a sprawl of suburban areas. And this is my house, located in the suburb of Tokyo. I was born and lived there until the age of 8. The house was built by my grandfather in 1967. It is a plot right next to a large apartment estate development called Hibarigaoka Danchi. a picture from 1959. Contrary to the Ebenezer Howard's, the English British theorist, the Garden City Principles, in Japan, the suburb was treated as bedtown and purely constructed to house the rapidly growing population. People commute to the city center. A typical apartment block made from reinforced concrete. The country's population is now declining, and there are many vacant houses. By 2033, it will reach to 21,660,000 vacant houses, over 30% of Japan's building stock, which is quite frightening. Because of elderly people cannot really maintain large houses anymore, there is a sort of a trend of extraction instead of extension. By shrinking the house, it reduces the energy bills and brings more light inside of the house by creating spaces around the house. Innovating existing houses is becoming more and more popular. Just to finish, to mention the latest trends briefly, the Olympics again are making large changes to Tokyo's infrastructure, and government specifically designated development areas are building more in order to increase work and living spaces. The aim is to attract foreign investments and workers. And multi-program towers are built over railway stations. This is over Shibuya Station, linking district with many layers walkways. So the city becomes really three-dimensional. Now, because of Corona and pandemic, the trend of building high-density city center blocks became questionable, and the people's eyes are back to suburb again. So this is the last case study. Omiya Bonsai Village is one of the suburban town. It's a successful suburban town where production of bonsai trees became a successful business for them. The people here originally migrated after Kanto earthquake in 1923 from central Tokyo, Bunkyoku district, where historically the gardeners of daimyo's houses lived in Tokyo period. It uses the greener environment of suburb in advantage and created socially and economically sustainable community. So this is my last slides. So I end my presentation at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful. That was a kind of almost like a whirlwind history through about more than 150 years, but it was really succinct, and that's the most succinct kind of history of Tokyo urban development I've seen. So thank you for that. That was really good. There's so much that stands out as contrasting to London, and I guess you were kind of mindful of the ways that it was similar and dissimilar to London and the UK. I think one comment that I hear a lot of the time is that when people think about what the townscape of Tokyo looks like, it's not necessarily a beautiful townscape. I think your first slide where you showed like a very, very tall building next to lots of small houses is kind of what some people would say is a kind of chaotic kind of sort of juxtaposition of different forms with not much logic about how they came about. How do you, and in London, we're quite mindful that any new development has a kind of positive effect on its context. So I guess one question is, you know, do you find Tokyo a beautiful city, and do you think it's important that there should be a kind of coherent sort of logic to the way the urban form kind of develops?
I think the Japanese made a mistake about was the disregard to the history, because they were so rushing to develop, as fast as they can. Therefore, I mean, the planning system they have understood still very, very fast. It only takes 7 days to approve.
Wow.
Compared to UK, which is statutory period is 8 weeks, but to take another 8 weeks to validate to start with. Anyway, so because of the rush, they basically erased the historic trail, historic pattern of the city, which you can still read it, I think, in Tokyo if you look really closely, but not as evident. I mean, the bridge over the flyover bridge is really sort of a good example, I think. So people are more aware of importance of a kind of historic kind of a presence, because that is sort of defines people's identity, the community's identity. So they try to recover that to some extent, but it's really, it was more the urgency than anything else, from the devastation of earthquake, World War II, or the destroyed sort of a city that you have to recover. So they could not really sort of pay attention to those sort of aspects, I think. So yeah, I mean, I would say very ugly, yes.
I've walked a lot in Tokyo, and I find a lot of it is very beautiful. Actually, it's fascinating. In fact, it's a little bit like walking through London, where you go from village to village, neighborhood to neighborhood, and I find that there's still kind of quite a difference in the character between each of the various districts in Tokyo. Are people aware of needing to protect the character of various areas, and are there laws to govern that?
There's a law to govern that. I'm not sure. I don't think so. I don't think there's any sort of a kind of area designations or any sort of a regulatory restrictions to control that. Where are the characters coming from? I guess that's the sort of underlining sort of a history that is sort of running behind it somehow, as a kind of a psyche of the people, or some kind of unconsciousness perhaps, and the patterns of, I guess, those sort of I don't know, industry or trade or living. But yeah, that's very, I think, I don't know, you need to be trained to be able to spot that, can you? I mean, you go back to Japan quite often, so you're probably quite familiar with.
But if you walk, I don't know, I mean, if you walk sort of the gridded streets of Ginza, it's very different to the hills of Aoyama and Daikanyama, those kind of places. And it's partly, I think it seems from your presentation, about the land use restrictions, which are historic.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, there's some really good questions starting to come in. I've got just one more as chair. We've got plenty of time to address these. One interesting kind of comment was about the speed of the planning system and how neighbours respond to new development. And in the UK, often the local neighbours will get in the way of something which is not deemed appropriate in any kind of sense. But in a system where the rules are quite fixed to start with, is there any room for people to object to a development? Either something very big that's happening, or even like if your neighbor decides to do a kind of a house that they think is ugly or something.
Yeah, so you only need to consult neighbors or the public if you propose something outside of a restriction, i.e., bigger or different kind of use than the designated area. I mean, that's kind of happening more and more now. The residential area to revitalize that, they started mixing with commercials and cafes and whatever. I don't know, the hotels. So they are becoming more and more popular, or to do this kind of a proposal and then public consultations or larger development, like this kind of massive towers or public buildings. They do run the public consultations, but normal houses, they don't, because if it's within the restrictions, you are allowed to do anything. I think that nobody can say anything, because that is the sort of defined freedom that you are given. So sorry, my son just came in. So yeah, what I was saying, yes.
What do you, I mean, as an architect, what would you prefer? Which system would you prefer to operate in? One where the rules are very fixed, and you can do, you've got a lot of freedom, or one where we have kind of more in the UK, where it's actually subject to, a planning committee, a neighborhood consultation, and perhaps some policy, which is a little bit up for interpretation.
As an architect, yes, probably we prefer the Japanese system, because much more easier, I think, to design something or build something, as long as it's within the framework. But as a citizen, as a person, I don't know. I imagine that, if you remember this sort of weird concrete house that this self-built building, the neighbor must be really annoyed. Things like that popping up right next to you.
Yeah, we've had two questions. We've had lots of good questions. I'll start kind of picking these off. One is about space standards and whether there's space standards you need to comply, presumably for residential development. Is that dictated by zoning or a byproduct of densification? And another one about zoning is about how that works. Are areas zoned for a particular use, housing, commercial, or retail?
Now it's becoming the territory that I cannot really answer correctly. I'm just sort of guessing. Excuse myself that I never practiced in Japan, so I do know a little bit about how these things are formed. In terms of space standard, I believe there is something, but as you can sort of see, it's quite densely packed, and then not really sort of much to the UK space standard. You can cram, people into very, very small rooms. So I don't know what sort of degree of a space standard would be they are actually having, which is kind of interesting to find out. Actually, I'll investigate that more. In terms of zoning, I think it was set quite early on when they say, they redesigned the whole urban planning after the sort of earthquake and stuff. So they designated the whole area. You remember this color-coded area map, and they probably will kind of shift and changes, but the backbone of that remains quite sort of based on this. That's why I think the government is kind of injecting sort of special designated areas to sort of boost the kind of density or maximize some sort of a capacity to bring something in. I mean, now they are facing the problem of shrinking the populations, very low birth rate, so they need more people from foreign countries to live and work in Japan. Especially they're kind of really pushing on the central Tokyo to have that kind of workspace and living space for foreigners. So therefore these kind of tall towers in the central district is kind of popping up.
Yeah. I mean, just on that, there's a question from Lappan Chong, who says, very interesting presentation. As shown on the image, buildings of different height are laid side by side. Why haven't some buildings been built up when others haven't. Is that because they are located in different zones? And is it possible for a landlord to change the zone of their use? That's a good question. If someone's gone tall next to you, usually in the UK, that's a license for you to go tall as well. But you do get this very, very differentiated mix across the city.
I don't know the answer, sorry. I'd say it's all sort of prescribed. It's to do with the kind of light, angle of light, how much sort of sky you get, how much volume power ratio to the kind of a footprint of the building on the land. Zones are defined, the sort of maximum volumes. Some developer may have some kind of exceptions. I don't know how they get that. But yeah, so it's all sort of supposed to be prescribed. So maybe some developer didn't have enough money to build through maximum volumes. I don't know. But yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's all kind of not completely sort of a straight line. It's all go up and down. Yeah.
I don't find that. I mean, I find it quite interesting that happens. I mean, I don't want to be living next to, a tall neighbor, but I find it fascinating that there is a logic that underlies it through the rule system, but it kind of yields this very interesting kind of townscape. And it's not necessarily. I mean, I don't think it necessarily has to be beautiful, but kind of interesting and dynamic is things that people often talk about in Tokyo as well.
Yes,
and sort of that micro scale to the macro scale is really kind of all present.
Yes, I think what's characteristic is that the footprint of those tall buildings are very, very small. They're called pencil buildings because it's so skinny and tall. That's to do with the land ownership, because the lands are subdivided into different ownership, and then they're only allowed to build within the small plot, but they're allowed to maximize the kind of the volume. So that's why these sort of organically almost sort of popping up these buildings.
There's a question from James Gleason who asks about developers. In England, councils use Section 106 negotiations to make developers contribute to affordable housing and infrastructure, etc. Is there any equivalent mechanism in Japan to capture value and make developers contribute towards local priorities?
I believe so. Yes. Yeah. I mean, those kind of large development often provide these sort of public amenities and public realms improvements. But yeah, again, sorry. So it was very difficult for me to.
We're getting into very technical questions here.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, no, that's I wanted to also find out actually that element of how sort of a developer's contribution to the public and how that mechanism works in Japan compared to UK, which I've been kind of corresponding with my Japanese architects friends there to try to get a straight answer. But not quite there yet. Sorry.
Often, well, I mean, it's the case here that the answers aren't always very clear cut here either. An anonymous question: which do residents prefer in general, high rise or low rise?
It's elderly people who has the problem of walking or going up and down the staircase. They tend to prefer high-rise buildings with elevators. Is that sorry, answering the question? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I guess there's going to be different preferences for different people. I think there's, I guess there's a lot of, the English dream is to have, a home in the country. And if you can't get a home in the country, if you can get a terrace house with a garden, you're doing pretty well. So, I mean, and that sort of seems like kind of something that a lot of people aspire to do. Everyone wants their own garden. And I guess with the densification of a lot of Tokyo, Is there more cultural acceptance of living in high rise than perhaps, even though London's going kind of, multi-level, is not necessarily the thing that people are, want in their hearts? Do you think there's more acceptance of living in density and apartment living in Tokyo than other places, than in here?
I have a feeling yes. Yeah, I mean they prefer convenience.
Mm.
I think also quite kind of practically. I'm just talking about my parents. You know, they had a large house, kind of on the mountain, which is quite difficult to access. They have to drive. They cannot drive anymore, so they have to give up the house and then move into the city center, which is more convenient. They can walk to any, shops and museums, whatever, and then live in a kind of elevated apartment block, which is much easier for them to live. So I suppose in terms of I'm talking about sort of current trend of aging population of Japan demands more of this kind of living, I think.
Yeah.
It was quite interesting. I was watching this government video of it's called Super City. They became kind of a law now. They're pushing this new infrastructural idea. This whole digitized sort of communications, the robot kind of automated car, taxi come to pick up the granny from the countryside to the healthcare sort of a clinic in the town, and then all sort of every payment is done, on your smartphones and everything linked, and they're really pushing that sort of a AI assisted kind of a society.
So are there developments that have already implemented that, or is it still?
I think some of them are really doing that, because it seems it's really happening.
What's it called again?
It's called Super City.
Super City. I have to look this up.
It's very interesting. It's a bit dystopian, and you talk to the computers and robots, and they help you. But
there might be more kind of societal trust within Japan for people to trust technology, rather than here where there's kind of a mistrust of government and society at large. Perhaps. Sophie Hall Thompson asks, how is the concept of urban sprawl versus the compact city dealt with? It sounds like there's no strategic need for a considerable amount of new housing. And I think you mentioned in your talk also kind of about the sort of the rediscovery of the suburbs, which would seem to go against kind of the idea of the compact city.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's something quite interesting, new movement now that people are looking to move out from city center and live in a kind of a much more kind of a generous space, house, work from home. I think the problem in Tokyo is that all the suburbs are bed towns. They just doesn't have anything, to sort of as a kind of a industry or economy. So that's why my presentation ended. The good example or successful example, that was actually historic example of the bonsai town that they brought all this sort of trade into the kind of a suburban community. And I think that's really interesting. And a lot of my friends, they're pushing the idea of creating the sort of a local economy, kind of a sustainable society in the suburban situations there, so that they don't always have to travel to the central Tokyo every day taking the train.
Yeah. Do you think there'll be a generational shift between the expectations that you become a commuter, you work for a company, you become a salary man, and a newer generation that wants to kind of stay local and not have to spend hours commuting in and out of the city. Is that something? I mean, you've mentioned that there are people doing that. Do you think that's going to become more widespread?
That's my understanding, but yeah, I cannot maybe to be sure. Sorry, I'm not there. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
sort of a recently I heard from my friends, and that's what they're pushing for it. Whether that is the larger trend, yeah, I can't say that is the truth or not. So
yeah, and I think we're in the middle of perhaps a kind of a geographical shift in London where people are thinking they don't have to live in, zone 1, 2, 3, but actually they could live outside and still kind of have a feasible existence. Claire San Martin asks, are all cities in Japan declining in population, or are some growing and some others shrinking?
I think Tokyo is still growing, but the
Yeah.
rest is all, yeah, is shrinking really badly.
I know the villages, some smaller villages were shrinking, and there were kind of tax incentives to get people to move back to village. If you lived there for a while and you had a kid, then the government would give you money to stay there, because villages were just sort of emptying out, becoming very old, and then just sort of almost being abandoned.
Yes, yeah. No, there are lots of abandoned villages.
Let me see. Is there much prefabrication of buildings off-site in Japan rather than constructing them on-site, particularly as the sites are very, very tight?
All the houses, the little houses, are prefabricated. Most of them. They build really quick as well. The construction period is sort of about 3 months.
Wow.
And everything is sort of a kind of joints and stuff is all pre-cut. No, it's very efficient.
So what's the process of kind of building a house? Would you go to a company and buy a product from them?
I think majority of people do that, yes. They are kind of a volume house builders, house types that you can buy from catalog. I believe you can customize it to some extent, but mostly from standardized product.
Yeah, I think a kind of related question from Nigel Osteen. Hey, Nigel. I understand Japanese houses are not built to last as long as the UK ones. Perhaps this is related to the prefabricated question, and are replaced quite regularly. Is that correct? And if so, is that influenced by or an influence on the planning system in any way?
This is my own theory that that is actually a myth. Japanese house lasts long. It just you have to demolish it because the inherent tax system. So once your family who owns the property dies, then you have to pay, I don't know how much, it's like an extra kind of ordinary amount of tax you have to pay. So a lot of people cannot afford to inherit your parents' house. So they have to sell the land. That's why this subdivision of plots happening. You basically chop up your land and then parcel it and then sell different landowners in order to pay tax, which is kind of ridiculous. I mean, they destroyed my grandparents' house and they built 5 houses in one plot, which is really sad. They had a really beautiful house and they could have preserved it, but we couldn't. We just couldn't afford it. So that's kind of examples that these houses last long. I mean, 100, 150 years, no problem if you maintain it very well. It just system doesn't allow to do that.
Yeah. Chris Cooper asks, thanks again for a very interesting talk. Land parcels for housing look to get broken down between generations. At what point do they become so small that the family needs to sell or combine plots again? And does this happen much?
Yeah, I wonder. Now Atelier Bauer, the Japanese architect who studies this sort of a land ownership issue, quite sort of a very kind of a in detail, and they call it now 4th generations, which is really tiny plot now. I don't know how far they can go beyond that. I don't know. It's really tiny, so I don't think they can go any smaller.
Yeah. I mean, is there any, I mean, presumably there are some developers who can purchase and consolidate blocks of land for larger development, but
Yeah. No,
that,
I think that's what one of my slides is talking about. It's more to do with the sort of reorganizing infrastructure, i.e. road. You know, they have to widen the road, certain areas. So therefore, so there's sort of compulsory purchase order.
okay.
But they relocate those small households onto the high-rise buildings. So that, yeah, they get wider road and then they get better house. And so, yeah, that's, I think, happening.
We've had a couple of questions about affordable housing. It'd be interesting if you talk about that. And one also about property, Rosemary McQueen asks, are property prices accessible by those wanting to first time buy? And if not, how do those on lower incomes access accommodation? And I guess, is affordable housing purely, government provided, or are there, is there just cheap housing in cheap areas that becomes affordable just by nature of, their condition or their location?
The apartment development I showed in my presentation, this suburban large kind of a block of apartments, that was public housing for affordable rent or affordable price to buy, I believe. I don't know whether they could buy. And what am I saying? So yes, there are affordable housings. And what was the other question?
Well, if you're well, I mean, what options do you have if you're, say, a young professional and you want to get kind of on accommodation in Tokyo? Are there places, or if you're a situation you can't kind of buy your own house, is there affordable? Does the government make affordable housing available to you in the city, or do you just have to find cheap housing on in the bed towns?
I don't know. Sorry, I think people has to move out from center to find cheaper house or land or rent or. But yeah, sorry, I'm not living there, so.
Let's there's some other question. Let's turn it away from housing, because that's quite a rabbit hole of technicalities.
Sorry.
There's a question anonymously about public realm. Thinking about the public realm and areas between the buildings in Japanese cities and towns, are there any parallels with London's loss of purely public spaces to private interests and this idea of POPs, or privately owned public spaces? There's a lot of sort of concern by some in London that our best public spaces are becoming privatized. That's the Sky Garden, the shopping mall, and is that the best kind of public realm in Japan, Japanese cities, and are people concerned about it? If so,
well, yeah. Traditionally, there's no squares or this kind of public open spaces. I don't think. As I said, all the kind of gardens were belong to lords and landowners, and I don't know. So they're private lands, and so this whole idea of public squares, public places are really kind of imported after the Meiji period. And I'm not sure how much they've implemented. For example, there's no large central park like Hyde Park kind of thing in Tokyo. I mean, having said that, there are some sort of lands there, but that was kind of adapted from either kind of a ground from the temple compounds or something that already kind of existed. Having said that, I had a conversation with the guy works at Takenaka Corporation. They mentioned that there is a sort of a resurgence of the trend of looking at these public open spaces and public squares. Is getting more and more sort of popular. And he cited one of the recent example, good example, is the in front of Tokyo Central Station, which was redeveloped. I never been since that's been changed, but I saw the picture. It looks really, really clean and beautiful, redone. So what I was saying. So yeah, so it seems there a lot more kind of people are looking for this kind of spaces.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of becoming popular.
Do people protest in public spaces in Tokyo?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, there were protests quite a lot recently against the government and all the other things.
And would that just be sort of on the footpath outside of a government building? Is that that kind of place rather than a symbolic, another kind of symbolic public space like we have Parliament Square or Trafalgar Square here?
I don't know. I think they also sort of marched on the streets, and I don't know. So yeah, they do find these kind of open spaces together. But yeah, I mean, nowhere near to London's sort of amount of squares and public spaces, I don't think, in Tokyo.
Yeah. Perhaps something to be thankful for here as well. It's not all bad in London.
No, the park's amazing here.
Yes. Yeah. Maybe just a couple of last questions. One thing we don't see much of in Japan is biking. It's great for metro and pedestrians. Is there any movement or appetite for this in Japanese cities? Have you cycled in Japanese cities? What's it like? Is there the right kind of infrastructure for it?
That's interesting. I mean, the bicycles are very popular in Japan. I brought up in regional city and always cycled everywhere. In Tokyo, well, I suppose the difference is the bike here ride on the road, whereas in Japan you ride on the pedestrians.
So, really?
Yes, yeah, you're not allowed to really ride on the road.
Wow. Okay.
So that makes probably quite difficult for the road bike or somebody wants to really speed up. That would be dangerous.
So it may be more prevalent in kind of sort of more semi-rural and suburban areas rather than in Tokyo.
I wonder. I don't know, to be honest. It would be quite fun to ride in Tokyo, I'd imagine.
Although to contend with the crowds of people in some of the bigger areas, that would be something.
Yeah.
A final question is about the Nigel Ostim asks you about the background on your wall. So perhaps this can be a last easy question for you.
Yeah, I'm using my son's room because my family is upstairs in the living room, and this is his room. I decorated the room when he was age of 5. He's 18 now. He kept it still. He likes it, which is great. Wow. Yeah. It's a sort of interpretation of the Maurice Sendak, Where the Wild Things Are. The Max, his room, sort of a forest grew. And I planted Japanese monsters instead.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's beautiful. And they're all watching TV whilst you're in his bedroom, kind of doing a London Society event. Well, why don't we bring it to a close there? Thank you for all of the. Sorry for those that didn't have their questions answered. It was really a lot of kind of thought-provoking kind of comments made through your presentation, and I think it's kind of just fueled the curiosity of what's happening in Tokyo and Japan. So thank you for that presentation, and hope it's been a learning experience for all of us. Next week, and it will be on next Wednesday, the 4th of November, we're going to be hearing from Catherine Firth, the erstwhile Chief of Design at the LLDC, the London Legacy Development Corporation, and most recently lecturer in urban development at Harvard, who has recently moved back to London from a recent stint in Boston. So we'll be hearing from her. And the week after, David Rudlin speaking on France and his design codes, if he's allowed to talk about it, his work for the government. But Takeshi, thank you again. And if everyone was here, they would be giving you a round of applause now as well. So
thank you.
Thank you. And everyone have a good evening.